How do we make a stackable guide out of this guide, which has been made in a different software? I think it's 3Shape. Now, first of all, we need to examine this mesh to see whether it is usable. Otherwise, we will not be able to use any boolean cuts. And what I want to do is we want to separate this into a primary and also a secondary component. Now, if I examine the mesh, I can see loose vertices all over the place, which to me spells out that it's a defective mesh structure. Furthermore, we're going to look at the non-manifold edges, and this means that there's a lot of edges that have doubled up and we have faces intersecting each other. Again, this mesh would be most certainly not suitable for printing, and you would have problems with milling. Here I've deleted the non-manifold edges. There's too much work involved to actually get this to a printable or a cuttable state. Now, the best solution, I don't like doing this, but we're going to have to remesh it. So find yourself a voxel remesh. They're all over our modules. The voxel remesh in the tube folder. Now you can see we've got too much rounding of the edges. I'm going to put it to 0.08 to keep the crispness of the structure. The voxel remesh is very dense, so everything will take its time. Now it is an object mode, but I'm going to get rid of the wireframe mode by unchecking that box. Next, I'm going to go to the splint module, to the occlusal cutter section. That becomes the model that I'm working on, and I'm going to draw the line across the occlusal plane. Note that I'm putting the vertices on the highest points. Then we're going to make an occlusal plane and then a cutter. In edit mode, I'm going to select all, and I'm going to grab all of the vertices down to about halfway of those fixation pins. Make sure that the proportional editing tool is on, and then we're going to grab this exactly like a piece of material. Here I'm going to weave this in and out of my sleeves, so it's a little bit curvy. Now take your time to get this correct. There's a hole there which I'll move a little bit down, but yet I still need sufficient strength. So we need to always think about the strength. Here I'm going to move it between the two letters to make sure it doesn't interfere with my cutting. And of course, there we need to move it below. Check the intaglio surface to make sure the cutter is in exactly the correct position. So when this is completed, I'm going to show you the modifier stack, and then what we're going to do is we're going to click on cut layer. Now there is no layer, but what it does, it will enable all the modifiers. This is going to be our cutting tool. Now that becomes the object being cut, the denture, and then put the drop on the blue cutter. Now here we see that the boolean has failed. Go to the solver and put a 0 in it. Then we're going to hide it, and it still has failed. This is because there are intersecting vertices between the two objects. Select the cutter and key in G on the keyboard, and then use your arrow keys on the keyboard. Press them 2 or 3 or 4 times. This means that we are bringing the colliding vertices between the two objects away from each other, which gives a new calculation for the boolean. Now inspect your cut to make sure that it is there, and then we're going to apply it. We now have the primary and we have the secondary. Let us separate these. So with it being selected, look for a separate button. There's one in the model designer or elsewhere throughout the modules. I'm going to hide it to have a look and see, and this works perfectly now. Next, I'm going to put the cutter into a different collection because I don't need to see it all the time. We're going to go to the Stackable section, and we're going to import our dynamic attachment, turn it around, use the G key and the R key to rotate it, bring it into a suitable path of insertion or withdrawal, and move it where you think it is best suited. I'm trying to keep it away from the implant side if I can. Then we're going to copy that. Now when we copy this attachment, it'll stay in exactly the same path of insertion. And we're going to copy a few of these. And I'm going to fast forward this video. Once we're done with all of this, and we are more or less happy with the placement of the lower attachments, we're going to lock them. What that does, it's going to create more tops. So we've got more tops to work with. So if you wanted to have a secondary or tertiary or another one, we can use the same ones. So then we're going to focus on the lower attachments, and we're going to extrude them outwards. Now I don't want to extrude them through this because I don't have a fitting surface to cut these attachments with. So what I'm doing is I'm going to carefully put them through, but not all the way through. So just engaging the mesh. By editing the top and then using the R key and the G key, we can quite easily put this attachment where it needs to go. When we're done with that, I'm going to select all of the attachments, selecting the primary layer last and then moving them into the collection. This will unify them all together into one piece. The primary one is complete. Next, let's focus on the secondary. Here I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm going to extrude the front, or I'm going to edit the front. For this one, I'm going to lift the top one notch, and then we're going to design a connection point. Select the closest attachment and then connect that. That is going to effectively unify that attachment to the secondary, and hence it's turned blue. So here this is a bit tricky. What I want to do is I want to design my own connection point. So I'm going to use the E key and then the R key to rotate it, and then the E key to extrude it further. This looks a bit like a plumbing pipe. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing for this one. So E to extrude. Then I'm going to rotate it a little bit and rotate it again to engage into my layer. Then select all of your top attachments, select your secondary last and put it into the collection. This will unify the parts together as one part. This will complete the secondary layer. Let me now focus on the tertiary. Fortunately, we have a denture STL file with this case. So I'm going to be using that. I'm not happy with the mesh structure of this at all. And this can create problems with my boolean cuts. So what I'm going to do is we're going to remesh it in the tube section. Find your voxel remesh. Let's put this at 0.2 and apply that. Now we are in object mode, but we have the wireframe enabled. So go to the temp section and just untoggle the display wire. And then we're going to expose our cutter one more time. That's the object being cut. Put the dropper onto the blue cutter. And this should cut without any problems, which it has. So I've separated and deleted the other side. Now I'm going to go to the model designer because we want this to be a little bit more hygienic. So in order to cut this, we're going to use the lasso cut in the model designer. So with it being selected, and put your cursor to one of the highest points, and now I'm outlining a lasso. But this was a mistake because I want to make sure that I don't cut too much away from my denture. So let's do that again. By exposing the secondary, I can then cut away what I need to cut, because remember, we still have to make holes going through this denture or bridge. And here I've cut it, and then I feel that perhaps we can smooth it down a little bit as well. This is looking good. Next, what I want to do is I want to make holes going through these. Now, we do not have guide cutters and hole cutters, which we usually do. So I've got to think outside the box here. We're going to go to the model designer and create holes using the hole cutter, the curve cutting tools. Now, this will take a little while, granted, because of the complex mesh structures. So we're going to fast forward through this. Now, I think this is a little bit flimsy, this horseshoe. So, and also I don't have a good connection point for these most posterior attachments over here. I think the best bet would be to create a tube. So Control A, make sure you get rid of the snap magnet tool, and then shape the bar, and this will give you a good supportive strength. Make sure that it doesn't go onto the fitting surface, and it cannot interfere anywhere else. Next, we're going to voxel remesh this tube, and I'm going to join it together with the bridge. We're going to voxel remesh this into one solid structure, and we're going to set that to 0.2. Now I've got a good point of connection. Select your tertiary attachments, design your connection point, and then do exactly as we've done beforehand. Finally, select all of your attachments, select your tertiary last, and then move it into the tertiary collection. And this completes the stackable. Now we've got a bit of material missing, and you're going to have to build that up later on with resin.